What could make a man ride through a flood all night for a woman he once forgot was his wife? The bridge exploded apart with a crack that echoed through the canyon. Rain hammered Caleb Walker's coat as his horse stumbled through knee-deep mud. Half a mile ahead, a single lantern flickered on a lonely ridge where no one should have been. He tightened his grip on the reins, ignoring the cold water running down his sleeves. Naomi Carter had vanished before sunrise, and now the storm was hiding something far worse than darkness. But when Caleb finally saw what waited inside that tiny mountain shack, he stopped cold. If you enjoy heartfelt Western love stories, tell me where you're watching from and come ride this journey with us. The wind carried red dust across the streets of Silver Butte the morning Naomi Carter learned she might lose everything. She stood inside Harold Finch's bank with a stack of papers in her hands. The room smelled of ink, old wood, and coffee that had been sitting too long on a stove. Sunlight pushed through the front windows and settled across the counter where Harold adjusted his spectacles and read the same document for the third time. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," he said quietly, "but until this ownership issue is settled, the property remains tied up." Naomi looked down at the papers, her uncle's name, county seals, tax records, a death certificate folded at the corners from being handled too often. The small piece of land west of town was all she had left. A weathered cabin, a windmill that groaned every afternoon, a few acres of hard Arizona soil. Not much by most standards, everything by hers. "When does the bank move on it?" she asked. Harold hesitated. 90 days. The words landed softly. Still, they landed. Outside, a wagon rolled past the window. Somewhere down the street, a hammer struck metal. Life continued as though nothing had happened. Naomi thanked him and stepped outside. The afternoon sun was hot for October. She stood on the boardwalk for a moment and stared toward the distant red hills beyond town. 90 days. 3 months to save the only future she could still see. A week later, Evelyn Walker knocked on the door of Broken Mesa Ranch. Her son was repairing a corral gate when she arrived. Caleb Walker drove another nail into place before finally looking up. "What brings you all the way out here?" Evelyn crossed her arms. "A favor." Caleb sighed immediately. "No. You don't even know what it is." "I know you. That's enough." Evelyn shook her head. Some men grew softer with age. Her son had somehow become more stubborn. By sunset, she was still talking. The next day, she returned. Then again, 2 days later. Each visit ended the same way. No. No. And then another no. Until she finally said something that made him stop hammering. "A good woman is about to lose her land." Caleb straightened, not because he was interested, because his mother rarely described people that way. Evelyn told him everything: the inheritance, the missing legal requirements, the deadline, the marriage solution suggested by Reverend Samuel Reed, a simple arrangement, a signature, nothing more. Caleb listened without interrupting. When she finished, he rested both hands on the fence rail. No expectations? No. No moving in together? No. No pretending? Only on paper. The wind moved through the dry grass. A hawk circled somewhere above the ridge. Finally, Caleb nodded once. "Fine," Evelyn smiled. He immediately regretted agreeing. The wedding took place 6 days later. Judge Miller signed the documents in a cramped office beside the county records room. There were no flowers, no music, no family gathered around, only paperwork. Naomi wore a simple blue dress she already owned. Caleb wore the same brown coat he wore everywhere. The judge cleared his throat, asked a few questions, pushed the papers across the desk. Naomi signed first. Her handwriting was careful and neat. Then Caleb signed beneath her name. The scratch of his pen seemed unusually loud. That was it. No vows, no kiss, no celebration. The judge congratulated them anyway. Neither seemed to know how to respond. Outside, sunlight reflected off the dusty street. Caleb placed his hat back on his head. "Take care of yourself." It was the first full sentence he had spoken to her all morning. Then he walked toward his horse. Within seconds, he was riding north toward Broken Mesa Ranch. Naomi watched until he disappeared behind the feed store. The entire marriage had lasted less than 20 minutes. For the next 2 weeks, life continued almost exactly as before. Naomi worked her land. Caleb worked his ranch. Sometimes several days passed without either seeing the other. If anyone asked, they were husband and wife. If anyone watched closely, they looked like strangers. One chilly morning, Naomi entered Wilson's General Store to buy lamp oil and nails. The store was crowded. Ranch hands moved between shelves. A woman compared flower prices near the counter. The owner looked up from his ledger. "Morning, Mrs. Walker." Naomi paused. The name still felt unfamiliar. Before she could answer, movement near the coffee barrels caught her attention. Caleb was standing there, only a few steps away. The store owner smiled. Mrs. Walker was asking about lamp oil. Caleb looked toward Naomi, then looked away, then back again. A strange expression crossed his face. Not confusion exactly. Recognition. Delayed recognition. As though someone had reminded him of something he had forgotten. Something important. A few awkward seconds passed. "Oh." That was all he said. "Oh." The realization arrived slowly. Mrs. Walker. His wife. Naomi felt her fingers tighten around the oil can. No one else noticed. The owner returned to his ledger. The customers continued shopping. Only Naomi saw it. Only Naomi understood. For a long moment she stood there beneath the hanging lanterns, while dust drifted through beams of sunlight. People often talked about loneliness as though it came from being unwanted, as though rejection was the deepest wound a person could carry. Standing in that little store in Silver Butte, Naomi discovered something worse. Being forgotten. Because a person could argue with rejection. They could survive it. But being forgotten meant someone never carried you with them at all. Outside, the church bell rang noon across the town. Caleb paid for his coffee beans and left. Naomi watched the door close behind him. Then she picked up her supplies and stepped back into the Arizona sunlight. 90 days. A husband she barely knew. A marriage neither of them remembered. And a piece of land that still wasn't safe. The road ahead seemed longer than ever. But somewhere beyond the red hills, the wind kept moving. And whether she wanted it or not, so would her life. By the next Monday, Naomi had already begun clearing the old cabin on her uncle's land. The place sat west of Silver Butte, where the wagon road bent toward Mule Wash and the red cliffs rose like walls in the distance. The roof sagged on one corner. The front step had split down the middle. Inside, dust lay thick on the floorboards, and a family of field mice had made a kingdom in the back cupboard. Naomi opened every window. Then she rolled up her sleeves. She scrubbed the table with lye soap until the gray wood showed through. She beat the rugs against the porch rail until dust bloomed around her like smoke. She sorted the old books her uncle had kept in a crate by the stove, spelling primers, a worn Bible, 2 arithmetic readers with bent covers. By noon, she had placed them on the windowsill. A school did not need much to begin, only a roof, a few benches, and somebody stubborn enough to open the door. Caleb did not come by. Not that day. Not the day after. Naomi told herself she was relieved. On Wednesday afternoon, she was carrying a bucket from the well when she heard a horse scream near the south fence. She dropped the bucket and ran. A chestnut gelding stood tangled near the mesquite line, one front leg caught in loose wire. Caleb was already there, moving low and slow, his voice calm enough to cut through the animal's panic. "Easy now," he said. "Easy." Naomi stopped a few feet away. "What happened?" "Wire slipped off the old post." "It's my fence." "It's bad fence." She looked at him. He did not look back. Together they freed the horse. Caleb held the reins while Naomi wrapped the cut with clean cloth from her apron. Her hands were steady. His were rough and careful. When it was done, the gelding leaned against Caleb's shoulder as if ashamed of all the trouble. Naomi almost smiled. Caleb noticed. Almost. That evening, a sandstorm rolled in before sundown. It came fast across the flats, turning the sky copper and the air bitter. Naomi had walked too far from her cabin, checking the fence line Caleb had cursed under his breath. By the time she turned back, dust had swallowed the road. A hand caught her elbow. Not hard, just enough. "This way," Caleb said. She followed him through the blowing grit to the nearest shelter, the long horse barn at Broken Mesa Ranch. The door slammed behind them. Dust hissed against the walls. Inside, the horses shifted and snorted in their stalls. Naomi stood by the door, brushing sand from her sleeves. Caleb lit a lantern and hung it from a beam. "You can wait it out here." "I didn't mean to trouble you." "You didn't call the storm." He said it plain, like weather was weather and help was not something that needed a speech. For nearly an hour they stayed in the barn, listening to the wind rake across the boards. Caleb checked a bay mare's hoof. Naomi found a cracked feed scoop and mended its handle with twine from a nail by the wall. He watched her hands for a moment. "You taught school?" "Yes." "You fix scoops too?" "When a school has no money, the teacher fixes everything." He gave a small nod, as if that made sense to him. When the storm passed, he walked her back to the edge of her property with a lantern between them. Neither spoke much. At her gate, he paused. "That south fence won't hold another week." "I know. I can bring posts tomorrow." Naomi touched the gate latch. "I can pay for them when the bank matter clears." "I didn't ask." That made her look at him. He shifted the lantern to his other hand. "Good night, Mrs. Walker." The name sat differently in his mouth this time. Awkward, but not forgotten. The next morning, Naomi baked cornbread in a small iron pan before the sun had fully cleared the cliffs. She wrapped half of it in a clean cloth, walked it to the fence line between their places, and set it on the top rail. No note, no knock, no explanation. By sundown, the cloth was gone. The next morning, the pan sat on the same rail, washed clean, turned upside down so the dust would not settle inside. Naomi stood there with one hand on the gate. For some reason, that clean pan stayed with her all day. On Sunday, Evelyn Walker invited them both to supper. Naomi almost refused. Caleb looked like he wished she had. Still, they came. Evelyn's little house in town smelled of beef stew, coffee, and fresh biscuits. Sheriff Ben Harper was there too, leaning back in a chair by the stove, pretending not to enjoy Caleb's discomfort. Naomi sat straight at the table, hands folded in her lap. Caleb sat across from her, quiet as a fence post. For a while the meal passed easy enough. Then Evelyn set down the coffee pot and asked, "Caleb, when are you planning to bring your wife to supper proper, instead of making me drag both of you here like stray cats?" The room went still. Caleb looked at his mother, then at Naomi. For one sharp second, he seemed to forget the word wife had anything to do with him. Ben lowered his eyes to his coffee. Naomi smiled before anyone could see the hurt reach her face. "This supper is proper enough, Mrs. Walker." Evelyn's expression softened. Caleb said nothing. But after that, he did not touch his coffee. That night, Naomi walked home beneath a sky thick with stars. Her boots made small sounds in the dust. The school books waited on her windowsill. The clean pan sat on her table. She told herself not to expect anything, Expectation was a dangerous thing. Still, across the dark stretch of land, Caleb stood on his porch longer than usual, looking toward the faint glow in Naomi's window. For the first time since signing those papers, he remembered her before anyone reminded him, and that troubled him more than he cared to admit. October settled over Silver Butte in quiet ways. The mornings came colder. The shadows stretched longer across the red earth. By sunrise, a thin layer of frost sometimes clung to the water troughs before disappearing under the Arizona sun. Caleb found himself riding west more often. At first, he told himself it was because Naomi's fence still needed work. Then it was the roof over the cabin porch. Then a loose shutter. Then a stubborn gate hinge. There always seemed to be something. One Tuesday morning, he arrived carrying a bundle of cedar boards across his saddle. Naomi stepped out onto the porch. What happened now? The porch rail. She looked at it. It seems fine. It won't be after winter. Without another word, Caleb started working. The steady sound of his hammer echoed across the property. Naomi returned to sorting books for the schoolhouse she hoped to open. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It no longer felt empty. Around noon, Naomi brought out 2 cups of coffee. She placed one beside him on the porch post. Caleb glanced at it, then at her. Thank you. She nodded. That was all. Yet somehow the moment stayed with both of them. A few days later, Caleb appeared carrying a sack of oats. Naomi frowned. My horse isn't starving. The old mare is. He pointed toward the pasture. The gray mare lifted her head from the sparse grass. Age showed in her hips. Naomi crossed her arms. You notice everything, don't you? Most things. He emptied the oats into a feed bin. The mare immediately wandered over. Naomi watched him from the corner of her eye. He spoke more to animals than people. Yet every time he helped, he somehow noticed exactly what was needed. Autumn continued. Day after day. Little things accumulated, like dust on a windowsill, like sunlight moving across a floor, like feelings neither of them named. Then Kurt Mercer arrived. The first thing people noticed was his suit. Nobody in Silver Butte wore a city suit while traveling ranch country. The second thing they noticed was the horse. Expensive, polished tack, fresh shoes, the kind of horse a man rode when he wanted everyone to know he had money. Kurt introduced himself at the general store, then the feed supply, then the barber shop. Within 2 days he knew half the town. Within 4 days he knew exactly where Naomi Carter's property sat. The new freight route planned between Tucson and the mining settlements would eventually pass near her land. Most folks hadn't realized what that meant. Kurt had. One afternoon, he rode onto Naomi's property with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I hear this land might be available. It isn't. Everything's available for the right price. Not this. His smile remained, but it grew thinner. Think about it. She didn't. The answer remained no. The next week he returned, and the week after that. Each time the offer increased. Each time Naomi refused. Eventually Kurt stopped trying to buy and started asking questions. Questions about ownership. Questions about legal filings. Questions about her marriage. One evening Caleb rode into town and found Sheriff Ben Harper leaning against the boardwalk outside the jail. Ben folded a newspaper. You hear what Mercer is digging into? No. He spent half the morning at the county office. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. Ben noticed. What exactly is he after? The same thing men like him are always after. Money, land, opportunity, and weakness. The next Sunday, whispers began appearing around town, at church, at the feed store, outside the post office. People talked quietly, carefully. but not quietly enough. The marriage, the timing, the paperwork, the fact that Caleb still lived at Broken Mesa, the fact that Naomi still lived alone. By Thursday, Kurt had enough pieces to start putting together a story, and stories spread faster than facts. Late that afternoon, Naomi found him waiting outside Harold Finch's bank. He tipped his hat. "Interesting arrangement you've got." Naomi didn't answer. "You and Walker don't live together." Still she said nothing. Kurt stepped closer. Not threatening, just confident. The county might find that interesting too. For the first time in weeks, something cold settled in Naomi's stomach, because he wasn't entirely wrong. That evening, the town felt different. People still greeted her, still smiled. But she could feel curiosity hanging in the air. Questions, doubts, speculation. She walked home beneath a red sunset and found Caleb repairing a loose section of fence near her property. He looked up immediately. Something in her face must have told him enough. "What happened?" "Mercer." That was all she said. It was enough. Caleb set down the hammer. The fading sunlight stretched long shadows across the pasture. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Naomi looked toward the distant road. "If they decide the marriage isn't real..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The land, the cabin, the school, everything. Caleb followed her gaze. The wind moved softly through the dry grass. Then he said something that surprised even himself. "Nobody's taking it." Naomi turned toward him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the horizon. Like a man making a decision. A serious one. Neither of them knew it yet. But Silver Butte was about to discover that the quiet cowboy who once forgot he had a wife remembered one thing very clearly, and that was whose side he intended to stand on. The rumors reached every corner of town before the week was over. They drifted through church pews, across card tables, along the boardwalk outside Harold Finch's bank. People lowered their voices when Naomi passed. Not because they disliked her, because they were curious. And curiosity could be just as uncomfortable. The trouble finally came to a head on a bright Saturday morning. Kurt Mercer stood outside the general store, speaking loudly enough for half the street to hear. "A marriage ought to look like a marriage." A few people shifted awkwardly. Others pretended not to listen. Naomi had just stepped out of the post office when she heard him. She kept walking. Kurt wasn't finished. Funny thing, nobody's ever seen Mr. and Mrs. Walker living under the same roof. The street grew quiet. Then came the sound of boots crossing the boardwalk. Slow, steady. Caleb. He stopped beside Naomi. Not in front of her. Not behind her. Beside her. Kurt smiled. "Walker." Caleb looked at him. Nothing more. Just looked. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Finally, Kurt shrugged. "If the county starts asking questions, don't say nobody warned you." Caleb's voice came out low and calm. "Anybody who wants to take her land will have to come through me first." The words settled over the street like a storm cloud. No shouting, no threats, just certainty. Kurt's smile disappeared. For the first time since arriving in Silver Butte, he seemed unsure of himself. Then he tipped his hat and walked away. The townspeople slowly returned to their business, but nobody forgot what they had heard. Neither did Naomi. That evening she sat alone on her porch while the sunset painted the cliffs in gold and copper. A lantern glowed beside her chair. The school books rested in neat stacks on the table. Everything she wanted was finally within reach. Yet her thoughts kept returning to Caleb. The way he had stepped beside her. The way he never tried to take control. Never spoke for her. Never treated her like someone who needed rescuing. He simply stayed. and somehow that made him harder to forget. A week passed, then another. The weather turned colder. The first winter clouds gathered beyond the mountains. Naomi began noticing things she wished she didn't. The sound of hoofbeats near sunset. The shape of Caleb's hat across a pasture. The coffee cup he always carried when working fences. Small things, dangerous things, because they mattered. One evening she found herself waiting near the gate without realizing it, watching the road, listening, expecting. When she finally understood what she was doing, she went inside immediately. That night, she barely slept. By morning, she had made a decision. She would pull back, starting now. The next afternoon, Caleb stopped by with replacement hinges for the schoolhouse door. Naomi thanked him, then returned to her work. No coffee, no conversation, no lingering. The day after that, she left no cornbread on the fence. The following Sunday, she sat on the opposite side of church. Every small habit disappeared, one by one. Caleb noticed all of them. The missing pan, the empty fence rail, the dark porch after sunset. The absence settled into his days like a missing board in a floor. Something felt wrong. He simply couldn't name it. Then came the rain, a cold November rain that drummed against rooftops long after dark. Sheriff Ben Harper found Caleb sitting inside the Silver Butte saloon nursing a cup of coffee. The place was nearly empty. Only a few ranch hands remained. Ben pulled out a chair. "You look miserable." "I'm drinking coffee." "Exactly." Caleb stared at the rain streaking the window. Ben followed his gaze, then spoke quietly. "If Naomi Carter left town tomorrow, would you know it?" Caleb didn't answer. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the distant hills. Ben waited. Still no answer. For the first time in years, Caleb felt something he couldn't solve with hard work or long hours in the saddle. Fear. Small, sharp, unwelcome. Ben stood. "That's what I thought." The sheriff walked away. Caleb remained where he was, listening to the rain. The next morning dawned gray and cold. A wagon stood outside Naomi's property. The gate hung open, and Naomi Carter was nowhere in sight. Caleb dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. The morning air felt wrong, heavy, the kind of stillness that sometimes came before trouble. He crossed the yard in long strides. The cabin door stood closed but unlocked. Inside, the stove was cold. A coffee cup sat beside the sink. A book lay open on the table. Nothing looked abandoned. Nothing looked planned. It looked interrupted. Caleb stepped back outside. Fresh wagon tracks cut across the damp ground. Only one set. Heading west, toward the canyon road. A ranch hand from town appeared on horseback just before noon. His horse was sweating. His face carried the look of a man bringing bad news. "The bridge at Dry Crossing is gone." Caleb turned sharply. "What?" "The storm hit the mountains last night. Flash flood came through before dawn. Took the bridge with it." The words landed hard. Dry Crossing was the only route leading back from the Western Canyon settlements, and Naomi had planned to visit a retired school teacher there to ask about old classroom benches. Suddenly, the empty cabin made sense. The wagon, the tracks, everything. Ben Harper arrived less than an hour later. By then, Caleb was already saddling his horse. Ben didn't try to stop him. "Nobody's gotten through since morning." Caleb tightened a strap. "I'm going. The water's still rising." "I'm going." Ben studied him for a long moment, then nodded, because there was nothing left to say. By late afternoon, rain had returned. The sky hung low over the red cliffs. Mud sucked at the horses' hooves. Water rushed through gullies that had been dry only days before. Caleb rode until darkness swallowed the landscape. Then he kept riding. The lantern tied to his saddle cast a weak circle of light ahead. Branches scraped his coat. Cold rain soaked through his hat. Still he continued, hour after hour. The trail climbed into the foothills west of Silver Butte. Near midnight he found the remains of the wagon. One wheel broken, half buried in mud beside the road. His chest tightened, but there were footprints, only one set. Leading uphill, he followed them. At first light, he spotted a weathered shepherd's shack clinging to the side of a ridge. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Relief hit him so suddenly he nearly laughed. He pushed open the door. Naomi looked up from the stove. For a second, neither of them moved. The room was small. One table, one cot, a kettle hanging above a weak fire. Rain tapped softly against the roof. "You found me," she said. Caleb stared at her. Mud covered his boots. Rainwater dripped from his coat. His eyes looked older than they had 2 days earlier. "You could have been hurt." "I'm fine. You didn't come back. The bridge collapsed." "I know." Silence settled between them, the kind that carried more than words. Naomi slowly stood. "You rode all night?" Caleb looked away, as if the answer embarrassed him. "Mostly." For some reason that nearly broke her heart, because nobody had ever crossed half a territory looking for her. Not like this. Not without being asked. The rain continued outside. Soft now. Steady. Naomi watched him remove his gloves. Watched him finally sit down. Watched exhaustion settle across his face. And suddenly she understood something. He had been afraid. Not of the storm. Not of the flood. Of losing her. The realization stayed between them. Quiet. Unavoidable. After a long while, Naomi spoke. "What happens when all this is over?" Caleb looked up. "The legal trouble." She folded her hands together. "The land. The marriage papers." Her voice softened. "What happens then?" For months he would have known exactly how to answer. The agreement ends. Life goes back to normal. Simple. Practical. Finished. But sitting there in that tiny mountain shack, none of those answers felt true anymore. Caleb looked toward the rain-streaked window, then back at Naomi. "I forgot about the marriage." The words came slowly. Honest. Painfully honest. Naomi lowered her eyes. He continued. "I forgot it almost the moment we signed the papers." A faint smile touched her lips. "Trust me, I noticed." For the first time, Caleb smiled too, only briefly. Then it faded. "But after a while, I started noticing other things." He looked at her directly. "The lamp in your window. The coffee. The school books. The sound of your gate." Naomi said nothing. "I started looking for those things." His voice dropped lower. "And when they weren't there anymore." The sentence remained unfinished. It didn't need finishing. The truth was already sitting between them. Caleb reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Naomi looked confused. Then she saw it. The wedding ring. Simple. Plain gold. The same ring he had worn since the day they signed the papers. He turned it once between his fingers. "I never took it off." Neither of them spoke. Outside, sunlight finally began breaking through the clouds. Small patches of gold appeared on the canyon walls. Caleb took a breath. The hardest one he'd taken in years. "If the legal trouble ends," he looked at her. "If the land is safe." Naomi waited. Every beat of her heart seemed loud inside the little room. Then Caleb said the words neither of them had expected when this story began. "This time I want to marry you for real." The silence afterward felt different. Not empty, not uncertain. Full, warm, like a place someone could finally rest. 1 year later, children rode horses through the morning dust toward a small schoolhouse west of Silver Butte. Laughter drifted across the yard. Books filled the shelves. Fresh paint covered the walls. Naomi stood at the doorway greeting students by name. Across the field, Caleb worked beside a new house built with his own hands. Not a large house, just enough. A porch, a kitchen, a view of the red hills, the kind of place people built when they planned to stay. By evening, the last students rode home. The desert cooled. A lantern glowed inside the schoolhouse window. Another glowed inside the house. And somewhere along the dusty roads of Silver Butte, people still told the story. The story of a cowboy who forgot he had a wife, only to discover she had quietly become the first person he thought about every morning, and the last person he wanted to come home to every night. As the sun settled behind the red cliffs of Silver Butte, and the lanterns began to glow in the windows they built together, it's hard not to wonder what we might have done in their place. Would we have walked away after a marriage that began as nothing more than a signature on a piece of paper? Would we have hidden behind old wounds, old fears, and the comfort of staying alone? Or would we have found the courage to keep showing up for someone, one ordinary day at a time? Because that's what stayed with me most about Caleb and Naomi. Not the flood, not the land, not even the wedding. It was the quiet moments, the repaired fence, the washed pan left on a rail, the porch light glowing after dark. The small choices that seemed insignificant until they became the foundation of a life. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes in the form of a person who stands beside you long enough for the loneliness to loosen its grip. Sometimes love isn't a lightning strike. Sometimes it's simply someone coming back, day after day, until home has a face. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what part stayed with you the most. And if you enjoy stories about second chances, quiet courage, and the kind of love that grows slowly but lasts, I hope you'll stay a little longer. There are more journeys waiting just down the trail, and I'd be honored to share the next one with you.